For decades, John Wayne stood tall as the symbol of American masculinity, fearless, bold, and larger than life. He was the ultimate cowboy, a man whose presence could dominate the screen with just a look. But behind the camera, not everyone admired the Duke. In fact, one Hollywood star, once close to him, was rumored to have utterly hated him. For years, fans wondered what had sparked the tension. Was it Wayne's political beliefs, his overpowering personality, or something that happened on set? The truth, as it turns out, is more complex and far more personal than anyone ever imagined. In the golden age of Hollywood, alliances and rivalries often blurred together. Actors who shared the screen might share little else off it. And in John Wayne's case, his commanding nature often rubbed people the wrong way. Yet this particular feud stood out because it came from someone who had once admired him deeply. Only now, after decades of speculation, do we finally know the real story, a mix of pride, betrayal, and two powerful egos that refuse to bow. This is not just a story about anger. It's a look behind the myth of the Duke himself. The man, the flaws, and the fiery clash that revealed the darker side of Hollywood's most unshakable hero. In the golden haze of post-war Hollywood, John Wayne was untouchable. He wasn't just an actor, he was an American symbol. His films dominated the box office, his deep voice commanded respect, and his presence on screen defined what many believed to be the essence of manhood. But behind the stoic cowboy image, Wayne was also known for something else: a fierce temper, unbending opinions, and an ego as big as Monument Valley itself. Among his peers, there were those who admired him deeply, and others who quietly resented the shadow he cast. But one co-star in particular went beyond simple resentment, according to those who knew them both. This actor's feelings toward Wayne went from admiration to outright hatred after a single incident that changed everything. It all began on the set of a 1950s Western. During the height of Wayne's career, the two men, both talented, proud, and used to being the center of attention, were cast together in what was meant to be a surefire hit. At first there was mutual respect. John Wayne, known for mentoring younger stars, had even praised his co-star publicly. "He's got grit," Wayne told a reporter. "Reminds me of myself when I started out." But behind the scenes, the atmosphere quickly grew tense. Wayne's way of working was direct and commanding. He liked things done his way. His co-star, however, was equally strong-willed, preferring to approach acting with emotional depth and modern technique. While Wayne relied on instinct and presence, his counterpart was more methodical, influenced by the emerging method acting movement that Wayne famously despised. Tensions first flared during a key rehearsal. Wayne reportedly cut off his co-star mid-scene, telling him, "You don't have to act it, kid. Just be it." The younger man, already feeling overshadowed, snapped back, "Maybe if you tried acting once in a while, you'd know the difference." The crew froze. Wayne's piercing stare said everything. From that moment, the friendship was over. What followed were days of silent hostility, cold glances, sarcastic remarks, and subtle power plays. Wayne used his influence with the director to change blocking and camera angles, ensuring that he remained the visual focus in every scene. "He didn't raise his voice," a crew member later recalled. "He didn't have to. You could feel the anger in the room." Their feud soon became Hollywood legend. Some said it was ego. Others believed it ran deeper, a clash of values, of generations, of what it meant to be a man in post-war America. Wayne embodied the old guard, traditional, patriotic, unyielding. His rival represented the new wave, introspective, emotional, and rebellious. Off camera, things only worsened. The co-star allegedly confided to friends that he couldn't stand Wayne's arrogance, calling him a bully who mistook volume for authority. Wayne, for his part, dismissed him as soft, claiming he didn't belong in the kind of films that built Hollywood's backbone. By the time filming wrapped, the two men refused to speak. Publicly, the studio tried to downplay the tension, but insiders knew the hatred was real. And though both went on to have successful careers, the wound never fully healed. Years later, when asked about Wayne in an interview, the actor didn't hold back. "He was a legend, sure," he said. "But legends aren't always good men. Sometimes they just have good lighting." It was a cutting remark, one that echoed long after Wayne's death. For fans, it was shocking to hear such raw honesty about a man once considered larger than life. But for those who knew both men, it made sense. Their feud wasn't just about pride, it was about principle. And as Hollywood aged, that principle, the clash between old-school toughness and new-school emotion, would define the industry for decades to come. To understand why so many actors clashed with John Wayne, you have to understand who he was behind the screen. Not the cowboy hero or the war commander, but the man who ruled every film set like his own frontier. Wayne didn't just play strong men. He was one, both in presence and in personality. Towering at 6'4", with that gravelly voice and unflinching stare, he commanded attention the moment he walked on set. Directors respected him, crews feared him, and co-stars either adored or despised him. There was rarely anything in between. He didn't compromise, one of his longtime cinematographers once said. You didn't tell the Duke what to do, you waited for him to tell you. This wasn't arrogance for the sake of ego. To Wayne, filmmaking was about order, discipline, and loyalty, values he carried from his conservative upbringing and his deep patriotism. He expected everyone around him to share the same work ethic and vision. But for some actors, especially those who approached acting as a craft of emotion and subtlety, Wayne's commanding style felt suffocating. He had this belief that a man should never show weakness, a former co-star revealed. If you cried on camera, he'd roll his eyes. If you hesitated, he'd tell you to toughen up. He didn't understand actors who felt things. He just did them. It was this old-school philosophy that made working with John Wayne both a privilege and a nightmare. For many, sharing a scene with him meant being constantly measured against his standard of real men, and anyone who didn't fit that mold was often met with ridicule or dismissal. The actor who grew to hate him learned this the hard way. During their collaboration, Wayne's dominance became unbearable. He'd interrupt scenes, give unasked-for direction, and loudly criticize line readings, even in front of the crew. One day, after a particularly tense exchange, Wayne reportedly muttered, "This isn't an acting class, son. It's a movie. Try to keep up." It was humiliating. The younger actor, known for his method-driven performances, felt cornered. But Wayne didn't back down. He saw it as a lesson in toughening up. To him, Hollywood wasn't about sensitivity or subtlety. It was about control. That control extended far beyond the camera. Wayne had enormous influence in Hollywood, politically, professionally, and socially. He was close with studio heads, had a direct hand in casting decisions, and wasn't afraid to voice his opinions about who didn't belong in Hollywood. Those who crossed him often found themselves quietly blacklisted from major studio projects. He was a man of conviction, said one producer. But that conviction could also feel like tyranny. To make matters worse, Wayne's political beliefs were as bold as his on-screen persona. A proud conservative during a time when Hollywood was becoming more liberal, he often clashed with younger, progressive actors who opposed his worldview. What might have started as artistic tension on set often grew into ideological warfare off it. For his rival, this was exactly what happened. Their feud wasn't just about acting styles, it was about identity. Wayne believed in a world of clear heroes and villains, of duty and honor. His co-star, however, saw shades of gray, believing that vulnerability could be just as heroic as strength. They were both right, and both too proud to admit it. After filming wrapped, insiders said Wayne made sure they would never work together again. He respected talent, one friend said, but he didn't forgive defiance. In interviews later in life, Wayne occasionally referenced actors who think they're poets, a thinly veiled jab at those who challenged his dominance. The man he clashed with remained silent for decades, until, years later, he finally broke that silence, revealing just how deeply the Duke's attitude had scarred him. What he said shocked fans, not because it painted Wayne as cruel, but because it exposed the vulnerability behind their feud. It wasn't just about power. It was about respect, and the moment that respect was broken, it was gone forever. Every feud has its turning point, that single moment when simmering tension finally erupts into open conflict. For John Wayne and the man who would come to hate him, that moment arrived one long, blistering afternoon on set. It was a scene that should have been simple. Two men, face to face, exchanging words before a climactic shootout. The cameras rolled, the dust settled in the air, and the tension was meant to be on screen. But instead, the real battle was happening behind the scenes, between Wayne's pride and his co-star's patience. According to those present that day, it started with something small. The younger actor, tired, focused, and intent on getting the emotion right, asked for another take. The director hesitated, knowing that Wayne disliked doing multiple takes. The Duke believed the first one was always the best. "We got it," he barked. "Let's move on." But his co-star disagreed. "I can do it better," he said calmly. Wayne turned slowly toward him, eyes narrowing beneath his broad-brimmed hat. "Son, if it wasn't good enough," he said, "you wouldn't be standing here with me." The crew laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke. It wasn't. The younger actor's face went red. He took a step forward. "Maybe if you stopped playing yourself in every movie," he shot back, "you'd know what good enough actually looks like." Silence. Even the wind seemed to stop. The director froze. The cameras kept rolling, and for a moment everyone thought Wayne might explode. He didn't, not immediately. Instead, he gave that infamous half-smile, the one fans knew so well, and growled, "You just made the biggest mistake of your career, kid." From that moment on, everything changed. Wayne refused to rehearse with him. When they filmed scenes together, he'd subtly upstage him, stepping into his light, blocking his face from the camera, cutting his dialogue short. It was a masterclass in dominance without a single raised voice. "He didn't have to yell," one crew member later said. "He could crush you with silence." But the young actor wasn't backing down. Each day became a battle of wills. He pushed harder, delivered his lines sharper, and refused to let Wayne intimidate him. The tension was so thick that even the crew avoided eye contact when both men were on set. Then came the breaking point. During one take, Wayne, visibly frustrated, went off script, deliberately shoving his co-star hard enough to knock him to the ground. The director yelled, "Cut!" and the set went dead quiet. Everyone waited for the young actor's reaction. Slowly, he got to his feet, dusted himself off, and glared at Wayne. "You ever touch me again," he said coldly, "and I'll forget you're John Wayne." The crew braced for the explosion, but Wayne only smirked. "You just did," he said, walking off. The incident became legend in Hollywood circles, whispered about but never officially confirmed. Both men finished the film, but barely spoke another word to each other. When it finally premiered, the tension that had boiled behind the scenes translated into electric on-screen chemistry. Critics praised their performances, unaware that the animosity was real. After filming Wrapped, the young actor swore he'd never work with Wayne again, and he didn't. He avoided interviews about the film for years, and when asked about Wayne, he would simply say, "We didn't see eye to eye." It wasn't until many years later, long after Wayne's death in 1979, that he finally told the truth. In a candid interview, he said, "He wasn't a monster. He was just a man who thought he had to be one." The world made him believe strength meant never backing down, never listening, never being wrong. But sometimes, that kind of strength breaks everything around it. Those words revealed the painful reality behind their feud. It wasn't just anger, it was disappointment. The young actor had once admired Wayne, maybe even looked up to him. But that admiration had turned to resentment when he realized the man he idolized couldn't separate his legend from himself. And for both of them, that realization came too late. When John Wayne passed away in 1979, Hollywood paused. The man who had come to symbolize the rugged, unflinching American hero was gone, and the industry he helped shape felt his absence like the loss of an era itself. But as tributes poured in, so did something else. Stories. Stories from people who had worked beside him, loved him, feared him, and, in some cases, despised him. For decades, Wayne had been seen as the Duke, the face of the Western frontier, a man's man who stood tall and never backed down. But behind that myth was a far more complicated reality, one that many in Hollywood had chosen to stay silent about until after his death. In private, Wayne was known for his commanding presence, but also for his contradictions. Crew members described him as both generous and intimidating, capable of offering a helping hand one moment and a harsh insult the next. He was two people, one director later said. The one you saw on screen and the one you had to survive off it. For years, those contradictions created as many enemies as they did friends. Some actors adored working with him, calling him loyal and protective. Others left set vowing never to return. It wasn't unusual for a co-star to praise Wayne's professionalism one day and confess, quietly, that they dreaded every scene with him the next. The truth began to surface slowly, through interviews and memoirs. Stories emerged of the young actors Wayne had belittled, the directors he overruled, the women he dismissed. But there were also tales of the quiet kindnesses he never wanted credited to his name, paying a struggling crewman's medical bills, buying Christmas gifts for the children of extras, or showing up unannounced to visit a sick friend. He was impossible, one actress admitted, but he was also human. The problem was, he didn't know how to show it. The man who once stood for strength and control had spent much of his private life battling insecurities. His need to dominate wasn't born from arrogance but from fear. Fear of fading, fear of being replaced, fear that the world would one day move on without him. And by the time Hollywood began to change in the 1970s, Wayne knew that time was coming. The roles that once glorified his brand of masculinity were vanishing. Younger, more emotional actors, like Dustin Hoffman, Al Pacino, and Jack Nicholson, were redefining what it meant to be a man on screen. They were flawed, vulnerable, and raw. Everything Wayne had been taught to reject. He didn't understand it, said one of his former co-stars. He thought they were ruining movies, but really, they were just showing another side of what it means to be human. As he grew older, Wayne's once commanding health began to decline. Cancer, which he had fought and temporarily defeated years earlier, returned with a vengeance. The towering cowboy, who had once embodied invincibility, now faced his greatest enemy, fragility. In those final years, people who knew him best say something shifted. He became quieter, more reflective. He started reaching out to people he hadn't spoken to in years, including some of those he'd wronged. One of them was the co-star he had clashed with so bitterly years before. When asked about that reconciliation, the actor simply said, "We talked." He didn't apologize with words. He didn't know how. But I could tell he was sorry. After Wayne's death, that same actor would speak of him with an honesty no one else dared. "He made me furious," he said, "but I also learned from him." Maybe that's the tragedy of John Wayne. He spent his whole life trying to be the man everyone thought he was, instead of the man he really was. Hollywood, for its part, has since learned to see him not just as a legend, but as a flawed, deeply human figure. Directors now cite him as both an inspiration and a warning, proof that strength without empathy can build empires but leave loneliness in its wake. Today, when old westerns play on late-night television, audiences still cheer when the Duke rides into frame, hat tipped, jaw set, and gun in hand. But for those who know the truth, there's something more behind that image. A sense of melancholy. Because beneath the swagger and the myth, John Wayne was a man trying to outrun his own shadow, and in the end, no one, not even the Duke, could do that forever.